Well, my name is Bill Piercy. I've been at OSU since 1960. I was one of the 5 founding members of the Department of Oceanography back then. And now I guess I'm a Professor Emeritus in CEOAS, College Earth, Ocean and Atmospheric Sciences. And most of my research has been on what we call marine nekton, fishes in the ocean, but also squid and shrimp and other things like that. So I've had a really good time here. Great career and a lot of fun.
The rugged coastline near Cape Perpetua is known for its spectacular scenery and abundant wildlife. But the landscape that has fascinated scientist Bill Piercy for most of his career lies below the water. 35 miles offshore from Cape Perpetua, there is a deepwater bank known as Heceta Bank.
You wouldn't see it, just looking out over the blue expanse. It's one of the most productive areas on the coast. It's a hotspot for biological productivity. We talk about our successful fisheries in Oregon. Heceta Bank is the place.
So it's an extremely productive area because of these 2 things: unique position and the currents coming from the north during the summertime, accelerating upwelling. So it's a very productive area.
Heceta Bank has become one of the most studied features off of the Oregon coast. But that wasn't always the case. In the 1980s, Bill Piercy became one of the first scientists to get an up-close look at the underwater world of this structure.
And in 1987 and 88, I was privileged to make some of the first submersible dives off Heceta Bank. And it was amazing. It was truly amazing.
Brown above. Yeah, quite here they come in view pretty well.
There was this huge concentration of fish, very abundant, and high diversity. And rocky pinnacles on top of that bank were just amazing habitats for big, what we call macroinvertebrates. Things like sponges and crinoids and basket stars just blanketed these rocks. Big things like that.
The submerged structure, Heceta Bank, is unique on the West Coast. It transforms the waters around it, driving biological productivity and making nearby habitats thrive. Its effects are felt 35 miles away on the shore and even deep in the coastal forests. It draws birds and mammals from across the globe to its thriving waters. You're about to learn the science behind what makes Heceta Bank tick. A unique blend of geology, oceanography, and biology that has shaped a natural wonder unlike anything else along Oregon's coast. The productivity of Heceta Bank is driven by its geology. And to understand what makes it so special, you must first learn about the forces that created the uplifted structure of the bank.
So the way the ocean works is you get the coast, and the bottom drops off kind of slowly, and then it hits the continental shelf break and it just plummets down to the abyss. And the width of that is called the continental shelf. And what Heceta Bank does is it widens that continental shelf to over double the width. So it kind of sticks out into the ocean from the shore.
The offshore area of the Pacific Northwest from Cape Mendocino up to Vancouver Island is a subduction zone. And that essentially means that the Juan de Fuca plate is diving underneath North America. North America is acting like a snow shovel and just peeling all the sediment off the incoming plate and just kind of, just like a snow shovel, just kind of smushing it into a disorganized pile. It's a big attractant for rockfish because they're just rocks everywhere. So it's a very popular spot for rockfish that are looking for cover. And there's sort of a halo around that of where the juvenile rockfish live. But it's also, directly abuts big sandy areas where flatfish and other sort of sand-loving, biota live. And so it's kind of it's a very rich area that sort of has it all.
Geology is the first key to the puzzle of Heceta Bank's productivity. But another major factor is the oceanography, the way the movement of the currents, upwelling, and waves interact with the physical structures. The first documented mention of the bank came from Bruno Heceta, a Spanish explorer that gave his name to the structure. Heceta Bank, or Heceta Bank, as many fishermen and scientists now call it, was first described by the captain for the noticeable change in the watercolor. This was likely due to the high levels of chlorophyll, which jumpstarts the whole food chain.
The color of the ocean is very obvious that this is an area that has more plankton. If you're in a commercial airline flying down the coast, you're gonna see it. We fly satellites that can measure the actual chlorophyll, and there's a big pool sitting over the bank. It's Heceta Bank and Stonewall Bank. We call that the Heceta Bank Stonewall Complex. And it's that area where you see high amounts of chlorophyll in the water from phytoplankton blooming. We see a really productive upper ocean where fishermen can go out and catch fish. So it's this special area. And the reason it is special is because of that underwater topography and the way the currents interact with it. But what's amazing is the amount of structure that's there, both in the vertical, different layers, warm waters, cold waters, productive waters, not so productive. And then further, there's this set of currents that are being swept around the banks, and it's just a swirling, active area. So we know a lot about upwelling, how the wind blows and it brings up cold water from below and those nutrients. And what the bank does is it restructures that, and it actually enhances that upwelling in that area. So over the bank, we know there's a bigger area of colder water, a bigger area of nutrients, and a bigger place for plankton blooms. As that southward flow comes barreling down the coast, it encounters this obstacle, which is the bank. And oceanic flows don't like to go over things because the water's layered, and it just takes too much energy or momentum to go over something. So what it does is it goes around the outside, and the bank presents that obstacle. Because the bank is wider and the flow goes around it, it actually amplifies the upwelling. So there's more cold water in a bigger area over the bank. And you can see in these satellite images, there's a big cold part over the bank. And that cold water's come up from below and it's full of nutrients. And it's just the perfect recipe for a phytoplankton bloom. And it happens right over the bank there. And you can see it spreading out from the coast. It goes out 40, 50 miles, and it squirts offshore with all this rich plankton mass. So in this image, we're using bright reds to indicate where chlorophyll is high. With your naked eye from the coast, what you'd see is this green-brown water, this sort of soup. That's all good stuff. This is the plankton that's at the base of the food web. So that same wide area temperature is covered with plankton. It's a big, wide area. You can see in the bright reds here, it swirls around the bank. In fact, some of that water gets shot offshore and is providing nutrition or plankton to the offshore communities.
And that's the water that's so rich in nutrients that starts the food chain. First with phytoplankton, little plants that need the nutrients and carbon dioxide, and they grow and they get bigger. And then you have little zooplankton, things like copepods, euphausids, that eat these little plants. And then they're the fodder for bigger things like little fishes, and like anchovy, for example, and sardine, and little rockfishes and juvenile fish of all kinds. And those then are eaten by the bigger predators like salmon, bigger rockfish, mackerel, other species that are common off Heceta Bank.
One of the most fascinating effects that Heceta Bank has on the food web is how it interacts with offshore deep ocean species. In these cross-section charts, you can see concentrations of different sizes of fishes near the bank. Because of this interaction, it creates a virtual buffet of forage fishes for predators of all types.
So here you can see in the top panel at low frequency, near the surface, there's forage fishes like anchovies, herring, sand lance that are close to the surface, and they're usually found just offshore of a front off of Heceta Bank. This shows the animals that are smaller, like Crilla euphausids, little shrimp-like animals that are about an inch or so long, very abundant off the Oregon coast, in offshore waters. And these animals migrate vertically. They go down in the daytime, come up at night. And when this happens, a lot of times they're wafted inshore and they get trapped behind Heceta Bank here. They're very, very vulnerable to any kind of predators in here. And besides the euphausids, myctophids or lanternfish are often found in big concentrations right off Heceta Bank.
The oceanography and the geology of Heceta Bank are the engines that drive the biological productivity and amazing diversity of the region. The bank attracts a wide range of species, which in turn attracts the scientists who study them.
Heceta Bank being a rocky, deep-water rocky bank that extends up from 500 meters up to 70 meters, it's within the depth range of many important commercial species and non-commercial species of fish and invertebrates along our coast. Again, you kind of have this change of habitat types as you go from the middle of the continental shelf up onto the eastern flank of the bank and then over the top of this rugged ridge that forms the top of the bank and then down through these boulder and cobble habitats. And as you go from one habitat to the next, you see major shifts in the fish communities.
And when you actually look at some of the footage that the remotely operated vehicles and submarines bring in, you see that thick green water, and you see just thousands of baby rockfish and other organisms there. And one of the things that we discovered working with folks on the coast there is that those fish are a really important food source for a lot of predators, including other rockfish and salmon. So when the Chinook salmon come in, on their way to the rivers, they are chowing down on those juvenile rockfish. And you can see that if you go to the cleaning stations and open the stomachs of the fish as they're being cleaned. And so what that means is that high productivity on the bank is getting transferred all the way up into the coast range. The Chinook are also going south all the way down into California and taking those nutrients that they're picking up off the bank down into the Klamath and the Sacramento and so on. So there's this connectivity that happens within Oregon, but it actually extends all the way down the coast.
So the marine birds are a good indicator that there's food available in that area. Heceta Bank seems to be, a retention area for productivity and relatively high energy transfer up the food chain to marine birds and mammals. And there's oftentimes, I think of it as one of those locations that's sort of an oasis, where when conditions, it might be a low food production year for the birds, and you don't see many birds elsewhere, but they're still in relatively high abundance at Heceta Bank. One of the species that I study are short-tailed albatrosses that nest in Japan. And we put tracking devices on those birds in Japan, and we have tracked them all the way over to the Oregon coast and to Heceta Bank. The influence of the bank is beyond the spatial extent of the bank itself. We see not only high bird abundance and diversity over the bank and toward the outer edges, but also near shore and then also at times to the south.
If I'm looking for birds, I'll go down to Neptune State Park and then look in that near shore. And if we're lucky, we'll see them on the water. And so, of course, what they'll do is, since they feed on forage fish, and it could be juvenile rockfish, herring or sardines or sand lance, a suite of species in the buffet. There's something happening on the ocean floor that creates this upwelling and diversity that kickstarts the food web. Birds are here consistently. So to me, it's pretty exciting that you can have these specialists from multiple disciplines zeroing in on special areas.
The gardens are fertilized in the ocean by upwelling. So upwelling is one of the characters that's very common for most of the whale species that we study. that are migratory and take place along the California, Oregon, Washington coasts. Offshore here, the Heceta Banks has been an important area most years for quite a few animals, and we have a bit of evidence that the same animals are returning year after year. So I think when whales find something that works for them, they continue to exploit that. Productivity can be very, very different all around the world. And here off the Oregon coast, we get upwelling that's advective from winds that bring cold, nutrient-rich water to the surface, gets it into the sunlight, and makes it more productive for the whole food chain from phytoplankton up to whales. And then you have physical features like the banks, Heceta Banks. So those places have special importance because of the assurance of having upwelled water most years.
The biological abundance of Heceta Bank draws an array of species and the scientists who study them. But the area also draws fishing fleets that come to harvest a range of species in the waters near the bank, as well as those areas impacted by the productivity the bank creates.
We live in a really complex world, and this job is basically the same job it was thousands of years ago, using nets, traps, and hooks to catch this great protein for people and bring it back. That simple mission is something that I enjoy. I feel like I could see where I fit into the planet when we're hauling a trap full of fish or crab. It's a good feeling.
We actually work with a number of local fishermen, and that's the spot they go. You know, they sail out of either Newport or the Florence area, and they go right to that region because they know it's highly productive.
Certainly fish like structure, right? And that's a big structure, right? I think it's one of the biggest structures on the offshore structures on the slope in the fishing areas off the west coast. There's a long history of fishing around the bank, on the bank. The mix of species that's available to the fleet is maybe more available here than other available to the fleet. Because really, for the marketplace, you want to have a mix of species.
I look at a marine chart and I usually get excited because I associate so many good experiences from places I see, and certainly these banks are important. They're part of the basis of the richness of this part of the coast. On the east side of the bank, there's a big horseshoe-shaped area fed by the bank and the richness of the bank. And if the crab are in deep water, you're probably going to find quite a few of them just inside the banks. On the west side of the banks, there's a super steep drop-off. So there's kind of a funneling in the depth curve there. So I think sometimes that's the very best part of the coast that I know of to find sable fish.
Fishermen have long recognized that the banks and the shallow areas that they support around them give them a large area to catch fish. A lot of us that have been treated real well by our industries, I guess, feel like we need to either give a little back or protect what's there or fix what isn't somehow, and do what we can to work with research part of the equation to make it more sustainable.
We've done a lot of collaborative research in this lab, and you realize that first, fishermen know how to catch fish a lot better than scientists do, and they know a lot about the environment and all of the complexities of how our coastal systems work. And so it's really a nice, beneficial relationship when we're able to do that collaborative work.
I've worked with UC Santa Cruz, OSU, NOAA, the state of Oregon, and it's something that I like to be involved in. It's great catching millions of pounds of wonderful wild protein, but I want to also contribute to the knowledge base in some small way.
And I think it's just important that the fishermen and the coastal community and people in general realize how important and productive this bank is to not only the fishing community, but just to the productivity of the Oregon coastal area in general.
While modern fishermen, scientists, birders, and naturalists are drawn to Heceta Bank and the surrounding areas enhanced by its productivity, we also know that the very first humans in the Americas were likely drawn to this same area tens of thousands of years ago.
As sea level is lower, and this happens because to make ice the size of Canada, the water budget comes out of the ocean and lowers the world's oceans. But it would have exposed a tremendous amount of coastal landscape that the people that are ancestral to modern Native Americans would have been living out there, undoubtedly, in this place that's the highest resource area concentration on Oregon's coast. One idea that's pretty popular right now in archaeology in North America is that the first peoples to come into the Americas may have walked and boated their way down the coastline of the Pacific. Now, the evidence for that is very difficult to put your hands on because a lot of it is probably offshore. The banks that are out there, Heceta Bank, the Perpetua, Stonewall banks, these are ground fishing areas that are sort of raised rocky promontories out there. During the last glacial period, as sea level was lower, this would have actually been a small mountain range. So it's a chain of mountains that would have run roughly north-south. And on the east side, on the inland side of it, there would have been a large bay. And this bay is larger than San Diego Bay and smaller than San Francisco Bay. So it sets up these really unique environmental aspects of Oregon's coast that we really didn't understand that much until we started to get into the data and put all the maps together. And then as we've begun to do more of our work with the Nautilus and other vessels, we begin to see into the seafloor, and we're now reconstructing what the river systems were like. We can see actual signatures of river channels, and piecing together this past environment has been really important. And a place like the Heceta Bank has really been a focus for our work so far.
Heceta Bank is now one of the most researched areas on the West Coast. And while there's a lot that we know about how it was created and what drives its productivity, there's still more to learn. And in an era of rapid change that includes ocean acidification, hypoxia, dead zones, and climate change, the data collected over decades on this spot is essential to our understanding of a changing ocean.
So one of the reasons we know so much about Heceta Bank is because of oceanography at Oregon State University, getting out there in ships, making measurements. And it's absolutely imperative that we keep that set of measurements going.
These long-term time series provide some of the most important information we have to look at changes in ocean condition, how that impacts not only these natural resources like marine birds, but also the fisheries too.
So the fishing industry, you want to embrace the kind of science that I can give you for planning purposes if nothing else, right? So I think the fishing industry is probably embracing the scientific side probably more than ever.
Scientific ecological knowledge and local ecological knowledge are on a merging path. But the changing climate is a big concern. You know, the lowering pH, acidification, the rising temperatures and associated changes with that. We need to adapt to these changes, and I'm certain that the scientific community can help us do that.
Well, I think our initial research was kind of pioneering research on Heceta. And so that is, as I say, very gratifying to see that this is something that we kind of initiated and it's continuing. And quite frankly, I've lost track of everything that's going on there now. It's an area that's sort of bustling with research.
Oregon is an ocean state, and we all identify with the ocean. It does, amazing things for us, and it absolutely stabilizes our environment. It provides food, it provides recreation. It does a whole number of things for us. We need to keep that going and have that be a healthy marine ecosystem. And by making these measurements, we can see early signs of change. We can also learn areas that are special. And Heceta Bank is definitely a special place.
Most of the life on the planet is under that surface. You know, there's incredible diversity. It's huge, but it's finite, and we need to take care of it. It's a great big garden.